Erica, you worked for the BBC for a while.
Yes.
Your husband worked for the BBC for the whole of his, or a lot
Nearly
of his
all,
career.
yes.
And your father worked for the BBC
Yes.
as well. So it's
and his brother.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's a real family interest we've got here.
So it adds up to 100 years.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So when did your father start working?
As far as I know, they were married in 1932 and he was already working there then.
1932.
So I think about 1931 he went there. His brother also at the same time.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was all radio in those days.
Yes, it was. And the
No
grandfather,
television.
their father, had said to them, this is the up-and-coming thing, this wireless. I think you should join it. And that's when the two boys went there. They had at the time, they were running a speedway bike, and that they were going to make their money out of it, but of course they didn't. So their father was very glad they went to the BBC.
Yes.
I'm not sure that they started at Savoy Hill, but I'm not sure.
Were they engineers?
My father was an engineer and my uncle was an electrical engineer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So they worked in the equipment rooms.
So they worked for the equipment department, yes, they did, but in different parts of it.
And how much did they tell you about their time there?
Oh, not an awful lot about I don't know an awful lot about the early years. I was born in 1937 and they had a letter from Lord Reith congratulating them on my birth.
Really?
Yeah, but we haven't got it.
Oh, what a shame. You've lost it. Yes.
Yeah, I've never seen it. I only remember from when I was about 2 or 3, which was the wartime. When the war was about to start, they were all on holiday. My father and his brother and our families and their parents were all on holiday in Pevensey Bay. And immediately they came home, dropped and took us to the place we were being evacuated to, which was Quainton, not far from here, and then off they went to Evesham, straight away.
To Evesham, yes,
Yeah,
to train, yes.
Straight away, that's where they went to, and that's where he was the whole year,
Right.
whole of the years he was there.
The whole of his time?
The whole of the time of the war, he was at Evesham.
Right. Now, Evesham was very important during the war.
I know it was.
Yes.
We didn't realise how important it was. Only recently have I known exactly what he was doing. He never told us. But my eldest son, when I was getting this stuff ready to talk to you, said, well, I know what Grandad was doing. He told me. They were making small transmitters for the correspondents to take abroad for the Normandy landing.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Now, I knew it was something to do with the war effort because when we went to Bletchley Park, and we've been there lots of times with our various sets of grandsons, they talked about Evesham and how they used to have stuff sent from there on dispatch bikes. So we knew that it was something to do with that. My father never told me. So
well, Bletchley Park was a secret.
Yes, it was.
For many
yes, it
years.
was. Yes, it was.
So this was these were presumably recordings or something like that, going backwards and forwards.
As far as I can tell, yes, but I don't know for sure. I don't know for sure.
Yes.
Don't know for sure.
Maybe they also wanted to transmit messages abroad.
Well, possibly. But he always said he'd signed the Official Secrets Act and that was it, so he would never tell us.
No.
We used to try and wheedle it out of him. Oh, go on, Dad, tell us what you did.
You never got anything out.
He was him and his brother were in the Dad's army, and they had to have about every 2 or 3 months they had to have a camp. And that he didn't come home then, that weekend. All the other weekends he got home to us. First of all in his car, then the car had to be mothballed, then on a motorbike, then there wasn't enough petrol, then he came any way he could come, and he would come by train, bus, and even hitchhike bike, But he always came home.
He always came home.
Dad always came home, yeah.
Yes. Where were you living then?
Now, we were evacuated to Quainton.
Oh, Quainton.
Yeah,
Yes.
we didn't go to Evesham. We went to live with another family in Quainton to start with. And then Mum was allocated a house. And this house was one up, one down, no water, electricity only downstairs, outside toilet, very, very basic. But we had it to ourselves. And if we'd gone back to Evesham, we'd have only had a room. And
yes.
because they decided to stay there, so they let the house, their own house in London, and rented this cottage. So that's where we were all the years.
Now, Evesham is the place where engineers go to train.
Yes, and my husband went there for training
Right.
too, yeah.
He went there to train, but also he worked there.
He worked there the whole time. In the latter years, we went back to see what was left there. The big house is still there. It had a conservatory on the side with grapes in. I know that because he used to bring grapes home for us. The men didn't live in the house. They lived in huts on the grounds. The ladies lived in the house. And the lady in charge was Mrs. Florrie Lewis, who later became my sister's godmother and a great friend of our family, and she kept them all thoroughly in check. She was a lovely lady.
So the women lived in the big house.
Yeah,
Yes.
And the men lived in the
the
huts.
Nissen huts.
That's what they were.
Nissen huts,
But
weren't
when
they?
we went there, the big house is still there, and it's now made into flats. And there's rather nice houses built where the huts were.
Yes.
So we actually went back once and had a look to see what was left, and I've got photos of it. I haven't got much about my uncle. Now, I phoned, his son has died, but I phoned his widow the other day and asked her, and she said she couldn't find anything. But I only know the little bits that applied to both of them, really, when they were at Evesham.
Sure, but they were both engineers.
Yes.
And did your uncle, do you think, work at Evesham as well?
Yes, they were both there for the whole of the time.
Really?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then what happened after the war?
Well, when they came back, when the war ended, they went back immediately, you know. Almost immediately they went back. And we were left in Quainton because the house that belonged to us in London, people were in it and we couldn't get them out. So we actually stayed at Quainton for 2 years, and in the end, that we did get the house back, and we went back to London. In the meantime, my father was back in London, and he stayed with my grandparents during the week because he couldn't go to our own house.
And when he was back in London?
He was at Avenue House at Clapham. There was research there, but he was actually engineering. He was an engineer, a tool maker. He was very good with lathes and things like that. He was a clever man.
So,
he was a clever man.
Do you know what sorts of things he was making?
All sorts of any kind of equipment that they needed. It was like a factory, you know. They made things to specification. They made things and the standard was very high. And other firms used to say if other firms made things, it had to be made up to BBC specification. Yeah.
Because in those days, I mean, the
say
BBC was, it was a very early broadcaster. You couldn't go out and buy equipment; you had to make your own.
They made their own, but then later other people started making it. You see, copying it really.
Yes, well,
copying it.
Yes.
And they had what they call P&ID now. Let me just think, Planning and Installation Department, because BBC has all these.
Yes, indeed.
And people wonder what you mean, don't they? But P&ID is Planning and Application Department, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And Dad used to talk about the research room and all that kind of thing. My uncle's work, I can't tell you any more about.
So you don't even know where he was working?
He was at Bush House later.
Oh, he was at Bush House?
Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah.
So engineering for the World Service or something like that, yeah. Now, what about you? You joined the BBC for a while.
Yes. When I came to leave school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. Like most of them don't, do they?
No.
And Dad said it would be a good thing to get into the BBC. So I went to the Langham and was interviewed by the head of Secretariat and got a very high job.
Did you?
D2W filing clerk in the registry.
Tongue in cheek here, yes.
At the television centre. Now, the television centre was only partly built.
Yes.
So the department, my husband's department that he went to later wasn't even there. It was still at Lime Grove. What was there? There were caravans in the car park. The producers were often in caravans. The scenic design was in the basement. Some of the secretaries and some of the people were upstairs. There was a restaurant upstairs for us. The post room was on the same floor as us, and the post room was amazing. Sacks of mail used to come in. Of course, now that won't happen. It'll all be emails.
Email or something, yes.
But actual sacks, sometimes two, would come in, and we had to be there at 8 o'clock twice a week to open every single letter and read it. Mm-hmm. It was called scrutining it, and write on the envelope where it had to go. So it might have to go to any of these initials that I've just been telling you. Yes. PCS, what was PCS? Programme Correspondence Section. All sorts of things like that. And you had to know the initials and put it on the envelope. That sometimes took 2 hours.
But you read every letter that came into Television Centre?
Yes, we did.
And these were largely listeners?
Unless it said personal on it.
Ah, right.
Now, if it said personal on it, then we couldn't.
Right.
But just an ordinary letter that came in, that they were all opened, and we read well, you wouldn't read every word, but you just read to see where it had to go.
Right.
So
but that must have been quite interesting.
Very interesting. Sometimes it was people asking for auditions. Sometimes it was contracts coming back. Sometimes it was people asking for signed photographs. Now, that was really common. David Attenborough, Sylvia Peters, that was one of the ladies on the news, I think. And they went to PCS, I think, Programme Correspondence Section, I'm not really sure. And they did send signed photos back. Some of them were not. Sometimes they were abusive. Now, if they were abusive, they had to go to the head of the department. She dealt with that. All sorts of letters.
So there were nutty letters by people writing in green ink.
Yes, there were. Yeah, but there really were.
Yes.
There really were. Yeah. So yes, it was interesting, but it was very time consuming, and you had to be there at 8 o'clock. Now I had to get 3 buses to get there. When I first went there, because that was the way Mum had worked out for me to get there. But later I found a better way of getting there, which was a bus to Ladbroke Grove and the train, which brought me straight through to the centre.
Ah, right.
Even that took quite a long time.
Tell me a bit more about it physically. You say it wasn't completed.
No, it was really a building site.
And what year was this?
1954.
54. Yeah. Right, very early, yes.
Yes, it was very early. And the car park was full of caravans and wagons and with offices and people in them.
Right, so it's still being built?
It was definitely still being built.
And what about stuff on the ring road?
Well, that was just beginning. Yes, beginning to. Mm-hmm. Yes, that was just beginning to. And I don't know where they all parked because of that. I don't know whether all that many people came by car then.
But were studios working? Or was this...
Not really, no. They were at Lime Grove.
Lime Grove.
I remember.
And Riverside, of course.
Riverside, yes, but I never went to Riverside. No. My husband used to work at Riverside.
Did you go to Lime Grove?
Yes.
And your husband was there?
He started at Lime Grove.
Right.
Yeah, he started at Lime Grove. So I left after about 2 or 3 years because I wasn't doing what I wanted to do, which was I'd liked chemistry and I wanted to work in a lab, you see.
Good for you.
So in the end, Dad gave in. He said, I don't think it's a very good idea. But I worked for the Central Public Health Laboratory, MRC, the Medical Research Council, which was really, it was quite a reasonable place. It was at Colindale. And the other bit was at Mill Hill. Yes. Half of it was at Mill Hill. Right. Half of it. I was at Colindale, which I did actually enjoy much more because I was doing my chemistry. And also I was doing evening classes as well as that, like people did then,
Yes.
Everybody went to evening classes.
Yes, but you didn't go to university.
No, one of the men I worked with did the whole of his degree at evening classes. Mm-hmm. So I worked there, and then they sent me to a hospital, and it was an isolation hospital, all full of all infectious diseases, and I had every injection under the sun, including the very first polio injections.
Really?
Yeah. And I worked there. And then after that, I went and worked in another lab at Schweppes.
Oh, right.
So I worked in labs all the time.
This was after the BBC?
After the BBC,
so
yeah.
you only worked for the BBC for
3 years.
3 years?
Yeah.
But very important years, those, because things were really
loads of things were happening, and Dad thought it was a terrible mistake.
Really?
Me going somewhere else.
Yeah.
Now, I was there when... Now, what would it be, BBC Two?
BBC Two opened, yes.
Or it was either that or something happened and they had a particular special day, but we all had to stay in the office.
Well, the day BBC Two opened, of course, there was a terrible power cut.
Yes, there was. I was there then, I'm sure.
You were there?
After a little while, they, right next to the centre, they built a rather nice little park on what I think was a bomb site, and we all used to go and sit in there and have our lunch. Shepherd's Bush wasn't such a nice place as it is now then. It was really quite a grotty place.
And there were trams there.
Yes, and noisy and dirty.
Yes,
and I used to long to see fields and see, because I'd brought up in Quainton.
Yes, exactly, yes. Quainton was at the end of the Metropolitan line, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, that station is now a public, open to the children's station. It's lovely. And they've Thomas the Tank Engine there.
They've got a sort of steam railway or something there, have they?
It's really good.
Yeah.
So we've got on to me. So I moved on. My great friend Mary, who I worked with at the BBC, is in a home in Woking. I don't see her, but we phone regularly, and she knows I'm doing this, and she's all very interested.
What did she do?
Well, she was in the office only a higher up than me.
Oh, I see.
We had two ladies there, two unmarried ladies who were in charge of us, and we were called by our surnames, so I was called Matthew, which I found that very odd.
That's interesting, because we were told it's all Christian names at the BBC.
Not then.
No.
Not for me. Not for me. The other interesting bit about Dad was what they had to wear. Now, they had to wear a suit all the time, except Saturday mornings when they were allowed to wear flannels. Oh. Presumably because they'd go and do some sport. And when I was a girl, we used to go to Motspur Park to the family days, which were wonderful days out, really good.
That's the BBC club area.
Yes, Dad belonged to the club. Yeah, my husband didn't belong to the club, but my dad did. And so we used to go to that. That was really good.
And what sort of things did he do in the club?
Well, he joined the club when he was at Evesham, because that was one of the few things they could do. And they used to play cricket and do darts and just do things to keep themselves occupied, I think. But when we got back home, he didn't really. He was a long way away from work. He didn't do very much then. But some of the girls that I worked in the office, they were in the sailing club and different things. Several people were in the club, and I'd like to be in it now, but I got no way of getting up to London to go to anything.
Not to Motspur Park,
or to anywhere else.
There was even a gliding club.
Oh yes, I know there was. Yeah, there were lots of really good things. Yeah.
Just going back to Television Centre, where was your office again in Television Centre?
It was on the first floor.
Right.
It overlooked the railway. The big windows overlooked the railway. So we were at that side there, looking towards Wood Lane. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes, but in a separate building. It wasn't Television Centre itself, was it?
Well, it was called Television Centre.
Yes.
Yeah, it was called Television Centre.
But were you in the round bit?
Well, the round bit was built, but only sort of partially being built.
Right.
Then. There wasn't much there.
No.
Actually, there wasn't an awful lot there. No. Every Tuesday, there was a greyhound racing at White City, and there was a little station which opened every Tuesday just for the greyhound racing. So when we wanted to go home, there were streams of people coming to the greyhound racing.
That was Wood Lane Station, wasn't it?
I think it must have been.
Next to Television
Right
Centre.
next to the centre.
Yes, that's right.
Right next to the centre.
And then that closed, yes.
Yes, and that's where as I said to you, the trains came right past our window.
Yes.
We were in the first floor. Underneath us, I think, were the scenic designers were underneath us.
Yes.
And that's all. There were no electricians there. There was no makeup. None of that.
Really?
It was only really the basic beginnings.
Yes, because
of
most
it.
of the recordings were being done at Lime Grove.
Yes,
or
they
most
were.
of the programmes.
Yes, they
because
were.
there wasn't much in the way of recording in those days.
No, most of it was made at Lime Grove. And when my husband started, that's where most of it was.
And did you go down to Lime Grove?
Yes, but not to work, just to go
Just
and
to
have a
look
look
around?
Yeah.
What was your impression of Lime Grove?
Grotty.
It had been a film studio.
I know
of
it
course.
had, but it was not. It was, it was a proper old shepherd's bush kind of place.
Yes, it was full of old bits of set.
Yes, it was
and
rather
things like that,
grotty,
yes.
really.
I
yeah.
remember if you walked to the canteen, you had to go past all sorts of
Yes.
bits and pieces that were being kept.
But I remember walking in through the scenic design at the centre, and that was really interesting because they were making all the big stuff, big bits of scenery.
Really?
Yeah. But that's all. I didn't ever see anything like the makeup department, all the things that my husband used to talk about. I didn't ever see any of that.
What about television itself? Were you watching it?
Well, we didn't actually have a television until 1959 here for our children. But we watched at home. Dad made our first television.
Did he?
Yeah.
Made one?
Yes, he did. It took him a whole winter to make.
And it worked?
It did.
Yes.
But it was greenish. And more or less like I see things now.
Yes. Ah, well.
But it worked, and I remember it was in a cabinet with doors, so that when you weren't looking at it, it was closed up, and we all sat round ready to make it. When I first met my husband,
so it wasn't black and white; it was
greenish.
Green.
When I first met my husband, I think there was a play on Sunday afternoons or something. He used to come specially to see it because they didn't have a television then. Right. And the first one I ever saw was my grandparents' one, which was, of course, the Queen's wedding. And we all sat in the dark with blinds all pulled and watched the wedding.
That's interesting, yes.
Yeah,
What sort of set was that?
Very small.
Very small.
Yeah, yeah. But the whole family came. There must have been 20 of us there, and my grandmother did a buffet for us.
It was very exciting because it was live.
Never seen it before.
It was
amazing.
live.
It was amazing.
Yes.
And then you'd sometimes see them in shop windows, and people would stop and look in the shop windows to see them.
Yes, but also, of course, it was recorded on film by, I think, I don't know which company it was. And, of course, you could go to the cinema to watch it in colour.
We also did that, yes. People
I suppose you were
that.
watching colour because it was green.
But our Dad's one was as green as could be.
Yes, that's lovely.
But he made it. Yeah, and I can remember in the whole winter he'd be soldering away at things.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's good. So your earliest television was what most people's were, which was the Coronation, and then you later on you were watching what, plays, variety. What sort of things did you enjoy?
Once we had a television set here, of course we had the children's programmes, and it's my fault really. I used to say once the children's programmes were finished, it was time for them to go to bed. Since we had 4 boys in just over 5 years, I was jolly well ready for them to go to bed then.
Yes.
And my eldest son said, "Do you know, I didn't realise, Mum, that things went on after that, after you put us all to bed."
Did none of your children want to work in the BBC?
No. They've done all sorts of different things, actually.
Yes.
Yeah, they've done all sorts of different things. But they really enjoyed it. And they used to watch Blue Peter, and we used to have to make the things that were on Blue Peter. Yes. And the other kind of programmes, what kind of music programmes and plays and things we used to watch. But the other sorts of programmes that used to be a nuisance were like, and this is going to my husband, the old grey whistle test, when he'd phone and say, "I'm going to say ever so sorry, I'm going to be late again tonight." It's the old grey whistle test.
From the presentation studio, yes.
Because they had to be there, somebody had to be there right to the end. That's why it was shift.
Yes, it went on to 11:30 or something.
Yes, it did, so which meant he wasn't home till 12:30.
Yes.
So he would always let me know if he was going to be late.
Did they get him a car to come home, or did he have to come back?
Well, he had his own car.
He had his own car, right.
But occasionally, when he didn't have the car, yes, he did get a car home.
Because in those days you could park almost anywhere.
Yes, you could.
Not a problem.
Yes, you could. But in the later years, they had to park at the top by where the White City Stadium used to be and walk down.
Now, when you were there, the stadium was working.
Was there.
Yes.
We went there to see Roger Bannister run.
Did you?
Yeah, before we were married. In that stadium, yes. Yeah.
And did they do television programmes from there?
I think they must have done. Yeah, they must have done, mustn't they? I can't remember, no.
Seeing any of those, no, okay. What made you leave the BBC in the end?
Well, because I wanted to do my chemistry.
Right.
And I wasn't doing it. And I wanted to take it a bit further. And I really wanted to do that in the beginning, but Dad said, in those days you did what your dad said.
Yes, and women in science, not so.
Well, I worked with nearly always all men, actually, which I didn't really worry about.
I'll let you into a secret. I did a chemistry degree.
Really, did you?
Yes.
Well, I loved chemistry, and I enjoyed working in it.
Yes.
And it was nearly all men, I must admit.
Yes.
But I never had any problems really until I was heavily pregnant and couldn't lift anything when they had to help me lift things just before I left work.
Yes.
And I left work to have the first baby.
Ah, right.
Yeah.
Yes. The BBC though had a lot of women working.
Yes, there were loads of women. And
were they nearly all in secretarial positions, or were the producers there?
There were a few. No, they were all secretaries to producers. I'll tell you what we did have. In the summer, we had girls come from the Central School of Speech and Drama, I think it was called, sort of to work with us for I suppose it was work experience. They used to come and work with us.
Yes.
And we showed them how to do the filing. I bet they thought, how boring.
What were you filing? I mean, you had all these letters to open.
Everything you can think of.
Yes.
Everything you can think of. Everyone has to have a contract, so you had a whole big thick file for every person, and huge filing cabinets as long as this room, with great big steps that we had to go up the top to the steps and get them down. Everyone had their own file. I was in the artistes department, which was only the people who were performing in various ways. So you'd get just one particular name, which you'd have to look up. Maybe a producer would phone down and say he was thinking of employing somebody or other, some particular show. Had we got a file for them? So,
I see.
So we'd have to find the file, make sure it was all in order, take it up. All sorts of people.
But not artist contracts, that was in a separate area.
We used to get contracts come in through the post.
Right.
And that would end up in their folder.
So you knew what people were earning.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, yeah. And also, one of the funniest things was the auditions. To read.
Yes.
The auditions are really funny. And they were really damning, some of them. They really were.
You mean the comments on the auditions?
The comments on the auditions.
Can you think of any, without naming
I'm not
names?
going to say any names at all, but things like, and sometimes you'd get a grandmother write a letter in. I mean, I could easily do this with my grandson now to say, he has such a beautiful voice. I really think he should be in television. And then this person would be auditioned and say, atrocious voice, bad posture, all sorts of things like that. Because they really were rather harsh.
But the culture of the BBC in those days, when you were in there in the canteen working or whatever it is, socially, there was the BBC club as well, presumably.
Yes, yeah.
Did it feel warm and friendly and welcoming?
I always felt perfectly all right there.
Yes.
Whether because my father worked there or not, I don't know, but he didn't ever work anywhere near where I was working. I always felt perfectly okay there, and I liked the people I met there. And quite a lot of them remain my friends, but only one left. No, I didn't ever feel awkward, ever.
And what was the food like?
The food wasn't all that bad. Wasn't too bad,
Was it a canteen
There
type
was a
of food?
canteen, but it was a small canteen, and there weren't many of us there then.
No, it's very early, yes.
And when Dad worked there, me and all the boys used to go up in the morning with him, park at White City, and he went to work and we went to London, and we'd do all the things we wanted to do in London. Then we'd come back to the centre, and the commissionaire would know we're coming, and he'd let us in. Dad would have told him we were coming in, and say, "Oh yes, hey, hello, here you are," and we'd go and eat there.
They knew everybody, didn't they?
Yes, and nobody said anything about. We had to obviously to buy it, but nobody said anything about not families coming in.
No.
And when one of my sons was at university in Birmingham, and he wanted to come home, he'd phone me and say, "Is Dad at work?" And I'd say, "Yes, he is. Only I'm thinking of getting a train." I said, "Well, phone him and tell him so he doesn't leave," and he would go and meet Dad there.
Yeah.
And he'd come home.
Yes.
And when we had the French children here, we used to take them up to see the centre, which they thought was wonderful, especially to see the news desk and all the various things.
And by that time, of course, all the studios were working.
By that time, it was open, all of it. By the time my husband was there, it was all open.
And it was colour. Most of it was colour.
It was,
yes.
it was, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
So when he went in 1960, and we were living here. And at first he didn't have a car. But there were two other men in the town who also worked there, and they used to go up together until he got a car, and then he drove himself up. And it was shift. 2 days on, 2 days off, 9 till 9, but often not much, much later, when it was something like the old grey whistle test, for instance. Every day, Christmas Day. He's often worked Christmas Day.
Yeah.
Very often worked Christmas Day if it happened to coincide then. Then they changed it to something I think called the 3-shift rota, which is 1 day on, 1 day off, 2 days on, 2 days off, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and a nighter.
A nighter.
Now he hated the nighters.
Night shift, yes.
Yeah. But then by that time, I suppose they thought people should be there overnight, because they were covering it was more like the rolling news is now almost, you see, and they had to be there. And when there was anything like an election or what's the name, singing thing? Eurovision. Song Contest. They were there all the time.
Long shifts, yes.
Very long shifts. I've got things in tickets in then that he had
before the working time director or whatever it is. Yes, which limits.
So there have been times when he's been there for hours and hours and hours.
But he didn't complain about the long hours, or did he?
Well, it was part of the job.
Part of the job. Yeah.
And only one night in all those years could he not get home, and that was because of the fog.
Ah.
Always he managed to get home. Otherwise, only once all those years.
Yes.
Which was, it's pretty good.
And when did he leave the BBC?
He left the BBC in 1991.
Right, okay.
And he started in 1960.
Right.
So all the years our boys were growing up, he worked at the BBC doing shift work, which actually was pretty good, because it meant that the boys saw a lot more of him, because he had those 2 days off home. Yes. So we would be able to take them swimming, and he'd be able to take them to football, and they'd go out on the bikes.
Yes.
But we had weekends, so I was often on my own at weekends with them, and that was the not so good. So shift work is not bad,
No, fair enough.
No.
When he was about to retire, he must have been quite senior by then.
He was a charge hand. He was head of his gang.
Yes.
They worked in gangs, 2 gangs, one off, one on, so that the actual desk he worked at, somebody else worked at the other times. Do you see what I mean? He had to share desks.
Yes.
At that time, all the studios were open. It was really busy. He was responsible for the big lights, which are called park hands. And park hands have things around them called barn doors, so that you regulate the way the light for the shadows and all the rest of it. the people who designed the lights, called the design engineers, they designed the plans. And in those days, the plan was a written plan. It was on a piece of paper.
Oh, yes.
And they had to check all the lights and get them all ready, but they didn't actually put them up. People called riggers did all that. So he didn't actually put the lights up. The riggers put the lights up. But he had to make sure all the lights were working.
Ah, I see.
And then once they were up, they had to make sure they were still working.
Yes, yes.
And in those days, as I said to you, it was on paper. About halfway through the time, and then I can't tell you exact date, they went to Wood Norton to learn how to use the consoles. And the consoles were the things that you used to do it all electronically.
The computer-controlled lighting rig. Yes.
But before that, it was all on paper. So after that, it would have been online, and they had to go on to that, had to work it from that. But it didn't make any difference to the actual work of doing the lights. But what it did make a difference was how to read the instructions and how to do it.
And did he have to sit in the studio in the studios while the programs were being recorded?
Sometimes, yes. Yes, sometimes they did.
Yeah.
Sometimes. We've been there when that happened, and to keep very quiet and not say anything.
Yes. In those days you could.
And
wander in.
The thing that we used to love watching, which you mustn't say, was the black and white minstrels, which our boys absolutely loved that.
Part of the history of the BBC, you can't deny it.
Now, of course, you wouldn't have that.
Well, you wouldn't do it now.
No, you wouldn't. But at that time, that was not considered anything at all to worry about.
Until death us do part.
Well, that's right. That's right. So he was also on maintenance. Now, maintenance, he's really good at that. I know that by what he did here. If anything went wrong, he was really, really good at finding out why and fixing it. And because he was so good at that, they always used to give him all those hard jobs to do. And he was good at it, and he was good at it at home. If anything went wrong, he'd always sort it out. Yes. He's patient.
Yes.
Yeah.
But very important to have somebody like that on hand.
And he was very critical when the programmes actually came out, especially after he retired.
Because by the time he retired, of course, most things were recorded, I presume. So he comes home and watched something that he'd been involved in.
Yes. And after he'd retired, and what Top of the Pops, which our boys absolutely loved, he was, just look at that. Well, just look at that. What's really bad. Look at that.
Well, I think he'd be even worse. He'd be even more critical these days, probably. Yes.
But he met lots of people. He didn't think anything of it. He was very blasé about it. Hardly ever mentioned it. Occasionally he might say, "Oh, I saw so and so today," but it was part of his job. It was nothing. And people have often said, "Oh, bet he met lots of famous people." Well, he did talk to lots of famous people. But it is part of the job. And I know even when I was there, you'd see all sorts of people, wouldn't you?
Any particularly memorable?
Only Margaret Thatcher. And Margaret Thatcher, at that time, our second son was unemployed. And he was on unemployment benefit because he was looking for a job. And he decided to go back, and we all decided it'd be better if he went back to college and did a bit more, you see. And apparently if they did go back to college, they stopped their unemployment benefit. And I thought that was a ridiculous thing to do when somebody was trying to improve their prospects.
Yes.
And so he spoke to Margaret Thatcher. No, he spoke to Margaret Thatcher. And I said, did you say about the unemployment? She said, no. I said, what? I spoke to her and didn't tell her. How unjust that was.
This was when she's appearing on a programme of some sort.
Yes. I said, you should have told her. We wrote, I think. But anyway, of course, he did get a job in the end. He didn't go back to college after all. He got a job.
No. When your father and your husband retired, did they both retire sort of with a contented view of the BBC?
My father did, yes. He retired, I think there was an age then, I'm not really sure.
60, yes.
He was older than 60, 63
really?
He was 63.
Must have been valuable.
Now, when my husband was retired, he was made redundant, but he was offered permanent nights, and we both said no. You're not doing permanent nights. And also by then he had moved to Elstree Studios,
Oh.
which was a shorter journey, same work, not quite so interesting because they did EastEnders, Hello, one or two, not a variety of work, but better for him from the point of view of the travelling. And they made a lot of them redundant at that particular time. So he was there for 31 years, by which time he was 62. So he retired when he was 62. And we both decided he wasn't going to do permanent nights, didn't matter that much. There wasn't much, it wasn't a variety of work there. They had an open day and we went once and saw it. It was quite interesting to see the set because it's only a cardboard set. It's quite good.
Quite.
So what have I missed? When my husband got the job at the BBC, my father said, "You'll be all right now, my boy." And how right he was.
Yes.
Because here am I, a BBC widow, and very glad to be one.
Yes, with, I hope, a reasonable pension.
Yes, it is a reasonable pension because I had a good husband that made sure he paid extra, so I did get
Absolutely.
extra.
Yes.
Yes,
You've done jolly well, if I might say so.
Good.